So Brett Kavanaugh was confirmed to the Supreme Court. I don't think that that is breaking news at this point, to be hearing it from me a couple of days after and the day after this completely gong show charade of a swearing in at the White House. And the confirmation of Brett Kavanaugh to the court is at the micro level an atrocity, right? You put this erratic, unhinged serial liar and serial accused sex assaulter on the court, possibly the second such sex assaulter, at least, really bad. It's not good. But in the midst of the Kavanaugh drama, there's kind of a bigger story, which is the radicalization of the American institutions that are part and parcel of the idea of the United States. So let's start with Kavanaugh and the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court, as an arbiter of justice and fairness, is under Trump even more just a de facto confirmation of corporate power and rubber stamp on the rights of the majority, whoever the majority happens to be, over the little guy, over women, over individuals. And the appointment, the confirmation of Brett Kavanaugh to that judicial body is only going to reinforce that. So the Supreme Court, as a pillar institution of the United States, has been significantly radicalized under Donald Trump. Let's talk about another institution, the Environmental Protection Agency. The Environmental Protection Agency, as a check on the sometimes bad and destructive actions of corporations against the environment, is becoming even more of a rubber stamp that simply allows the decimation of our environment to happen for the purposes of bolstering the profits of big corporations. That is the radicalization at the base level of the Environmental Protection Agency. The electoral systems of the 50 US states, instead of being a pillar of what makes the United States a democracy, really, it's like the main thing that makes the United States a democracy, free, fair, full elections. The electoral systems are being subjugated and curtailed by the removal of the Voting Rights Act, which has already led to attacks, successful attacks on voting rights, by a more and more right-wing Supreme Court, which is also going to influence voting law, by continued foreign and domestic attacks on the election systems themselves. And this ranges from Russian hacking of actual election equipment to voter suppression tactics like reducing early voting, voter purges, requirements of voter IDs that while they themselves are free, they require documents that themselves are not free. Corporate media as an institution continues to become a delivery system for polemics and profitable scandal mongering rather than a way for people to just be informed about issues that matter to them or I guess should matter to them. Media in general is under attack. We've got the false claims of fake news against media that Trump just doesn't like or that do critical reporting about what the administration is doing. We're seeing journalists specifically targeted. We are seeing disdain for the institution of media and reporting. This is not going to change anytime soon. This is a wholesale radicalization of American institutions. And if you look at research about radicalization, most of that research is about how an individual person becomes radicalized, right? Sometimes they become radicalized and they become a terrorist, as an example. What you quickly learn when you look at radicalization research is that in order to radicalize, you have to get people to not only reject the status quo, but sort of become indignant about it, even if they misunderstand the status quo. Now, sometimes there are good reasons to reject the status quo. So as an example, our campaign finance system is completely broken. To get people to really activate against our campaign finance system, you need people to understand why the status quo doesn't work. But radicalization often comes from tricking people into opposing the status quo in ways that aren't actually rooted in fact. So here's an example, right? How do you turn people against the media? You claim it's broken fake news every time they criticize the president. There are huge problems in media. We've talked about media consolidation. We've talked about bias to sensationalism. I won't give you the full list right now. But the problems in media are not the ones that Donald Trump claims are the problems that he's using to successfully turn people against the media. That is how you radicalize. How do you get Republicans to support the radicalization of the Supreme Court by confirming a lunatic, unhinged, serial accused sex assaulter? You attack the status quo of all of those claims against Kavanaugh being Democratic smears, maybe even involving the Clintons from years ago. I don't even know how you get to that conclusion, but they tried it. So what's the answer? Is voting enough? I don't know. That's why I've been saying for a while that really for change to happen, we more likely are going to need to go beyond just voting. I've talked about civil disobedience. I've talked about general or industry-wide strikes. Everybody has to vote. And when not voting would have won the number of electoral votes in the 2016 presidential election in all but like 2 states that had at least 50% voting, we need everybody voting first and foremost. But is voting going to be enough to turn back the radicalization we're seeing?
Well, it's fighting dirty, I think. So voting is step one, right? We have to take back the Senate, House, and presidency for 2020, and then we'll look at things like maybe packing the court, splitting up California, adding D.C. and Puerto Rico as states. Maybe that's how we win.
But that's only if and when we actually get out and vote, which most people don't do, particularly in midterms, and then have to push a bunch of stuff through. So that gets me to my question. Do we need to attempt to bring elements of our economy to a halt to show that we're serious? Like, is it at the point where only civil disobedience and general strikes have even the potential to really change this radicalization? I don't know the answer. I want to hear from you. And what I want to hear from you about is, what will it take? And is simply voting actually enough? I want to hear from you about that.